Okay, so Sohan, let's rewind back a year. What were the series of trigger moments that led to you kickstarting your journey with us at RNT Fitness?
Yeah, so like many people have been doing the fitness thing for decades. And one thing that I did that was really important was I finally got a DEXA scan. And it's a bit of a funny story because, as you know, like the DEXA is pretty accurate. And, going in, I was predicting, I've been weightlifting for a while, watching what I eat, expecting like a body fat percentage around 18%, right? And it comes back at like 24% or 25%. And I was just blown away. I'm like, okay, where is this 25% body fat sitting, right? Because I have the stereotypical South Asian skinny fat, look, right? And I was really that jolted me, and I'm like, okay, I really need to pay attention more to this. Like, clearly, what I'm doing is not working. And so, and I have all the numbers here too, which is great. I'm a very data driven guy. So the first, 24.7% at a weight of 174 pounds, right?
Okay.
And so I said, okay, let's just, double down, work hard, try to lose some weight. And I got a repeat scan a few months later, and I did lose weight, right? So I lost. So my new weight was 166, so about 8 pounds of weight loss, and I was proud of that part. And I got another DEXA scan, and the body fat actually went up.
Oh,
so
no.
it was now 26%. So that was the moment where I was like,
so what was the muscle difference on that? How much did you lost? How much muscle?
let's see. So I got just pulling it up. So on the first one, lean tissue. So the one caveat here is it's two different companies. So it's the same scanner. As you know, there's like two scanners, GE and Hologic. These are both GE scanners. So to answer your question, 124 pounds is listed as the lean mass on the first one. And then the second one, 117.8. So basically, I lost mostly muscle, right?
Yeah, that's quite
so bad. So even though I was trying to lose body fat, right, but I lost muscle.
And what was the time frame that you lost 7 pounds of muscle in?
That was, let's see, this was August. Yeah, beginning of August, and then this repeat scan was beginning of November.
Okay.
So that's when I said, oh man, I need some professional help, right? And I think earlier that summer, a friend of a friend of a friend had mentioned RNT, and it was funny. It's like, yeah, I know this guy. He got ripped, using RNT. And so then I double clicked and, was reading up on it. And I think the other key thing was recognizing South Asians are just different than other ethnic groups, right? So in my own work as a physician, so much of American medicine is built on data sets on white Caucasian people, and often male, right? So they're not capturing entire swaths of the population, right? Like not even females, and then if you're South Asian, forget it, right? Like none of the data really applies to you. And there's pockets in the U.S. that we're starting to think about this, right? Especially in California, where there's a huge South Asian population, but the approach just needed to be different. And so I loved the fact that you were South Asian. You guys had tons of experience with South Asians, and not to say that this can't be extrapolated to other groups, but for me at least, that was like a great point for me. And so that's when I said, okay, let's do it. I need some structure. I need some guidance. Clearly, what I'm doing is not working as the evidence in the DEXA. So that was the moment.
What did you do between the 3 months of that August DEXA scan and the November DEXA scan?
So in California, and macro counting has become a thing. That's like the latest craze. And so I was macro counting, and I think I set my overall caloric intake, I think around maybe 2,000 calories, and then I was just doing my own research and trying to set like targets for protein, carbs, and fats. And I think my protein target was like the typical 1 gram, or 1 gram per pound So probably higher than what I needed. And then my carbs was, I think, still just too high. And so that was like another specific area where I wanted help. I'm like, I don't know what these should be exactly. And so I just need a team that's done this a bunch of times. Like, sure, I could experiment on my own and eventually like get there in maybe a decade. But there's this great group that has done this with a ton of folks. And so why don't I just sign up and they'll tell me exactly what I need to do.
When you said at the beginning of this podcast that this has been a challenge for you for decades, what was that all about? Like how long before this DEXA scan were you trying to get into shape?
Yeah, I mean, I think like many people, I've been lifting since high school. And so I think I'm now realizing like there was a lack of doing things the right way and also discipline. I think just like very much kind of this weekend warrior type approach where you go in, you think you're doing things right, but you're not. And it was always a very inconsistent methodology, right? It's like, okay, you have periods where you're like, okay, yeah, I'm getting to the gym, followed by periods where like school or life sort of takes over and you're just like not going to the gym, right? So there's a lot of inconsistency. And so that, I think that's one of the biggest lessons, right? Like most things in life, you just have to have consistency. You're not going to see results if you're very willy-nilly about it. And so the discipline part is really important.
What was your why coming into this? Like you had the DEXA scan revelation and then you realized that the macro crying or whatever you were doing wasn't working, but you still got to like commit to this lifestyle change, this transformation. What was your underpinning why coming into it at the start of the year?
I think twofold. One is health. So I spend a lot of time with really sick people and they tend to be elderly. And I see all of the downstream effects of not taking care of yourself. And what's interesting is, modern health has pretty much figured out some of the scary stuff, right? Like if you have a heart attack, there's a good chance you're going to survive and do fine, right? Things that we don't have answers to, right, are Alzheimer's or something called vascular dementia. And that's literally just cholesterol building up on some of the tinier vessels in your brain, and it causes some profound cognitive changes. And so when I think about, and it's not just about extending your life, right? You want the last set of years of your life to be quality, right? And so when I think about that, the foundation for that has to be now. You can't do this when you're 60 or 70, right? You have to do it now. So that was point one, right? Setting that foundation. And then two, like many people, aesthetics. I was always chasing the six-pack dream, which finally hit that, so that was kind of cool. And that's always a nice like confidence boost for other things, other aspects of my life. So those were the two pushes that drove me to be motivated about this whole thing.
You've been a physician for years. So what was it around the longevity aspect that really kicked in now that didn't kick in, say, when you saw the sick patients for the last 5, 10, 15 years or so?
Yeah. So I've been practicing now for 8 years. And I would say, I mean, in the beginning, you're just getting comfortable, with being a physician. And so the first 3 years was training, right? So like, I didn't know my elbow from my butt, as I always joke, right? So it takes a while to get to that like holistic view of health. And there's some truths that I've come across. And, one of them is mental health. I think so much of mental health drives physical symptoms, right? So that's like point one. But, to answer your question, I think it took me a little bit of time to just realize, hey, like all of these like sick patients and a lot of their symptoms, it really does start like decades before, right? And people are finally coming around to thinking about this, right? Like a big push is we used to think about cholesterol and heart disease risk in these like 10-year increments, but we need to actually be thinking about this 30 years ahead of time, right? Because, if someone looked at both of our aorta, well, I don't know about yours, but the average person's like aorta, even in their 30s, like it's already got a ton of plaque on it. And so, you have to make those changes now. And that just crystallized for me, I think, just as I built experience as a physician.
And when you've seen people that have, let's say, have accumulated a lot of plaque in their 30s, have you seen it? Have you seen people able to sort of improve their symptoms or improve their condition, or is it a case of like once you've layered on the plaque, you're kind of done for?
No, it is reversible. So, and this is an area that I like to pay attention to because of course, I think a lot about my family, but also, again, tying back to, I think we don't have enough data specific to South Asians. So yes, you can reverse plaque, right? And that's the big push now, right? People are getting scans to measure how much plaque they have in the blood vessels surrounding the heart. And you can make changes to reverse that burden, that plaque burden. And so again, to the point of now is the time, like don't wait till you're 60. The old school model was, okay, you're 60, let's start you on a cholesterol medication and make diet and food, diet and exercise changes. That's too late. You got to start now. It's again building that foundation.
So now that you've you had the trigger moment, you got the motivation to start, you kick it off in January. What were some of the early challenges for you in embracing this new lifestyle when you kicked off in January 2024?
So honestly, the very beginning was fine, right? Because I was macro counting already. The extra structure was welcomed. So the beginning I was feeling pretty good. And then, towards the tail end of the cut, that last like 2 months, that was tough, right? Because there's significant caloric deficit happening and really sticking to the regimen. That part was really challenging. I think getting to the gym, like I was used to going to the gym, 2 to 3 times a week already. And so being asked to go 3 times a week, more like just consistently, that wasn't challenging for me personally. And then I think cardio requirements were at that point pretty minimal too. And so those 2 things were fine. I will say the steps, right? The steps, like initially you're like, man, it's a lot of steps. But once you do it for like a month, you're like, this is easy. Because you just start like talking to people on the phone or audio. I got really into audiobooks. And just being out in the sunshine was like really valuable. So that part was, took a little bit of work. But once you started doing it, it wasn't hard.
Okay, so you kind of like, because you had the foundation in place, it was for you, you were doing macro counting before, but now you're doing the right way of macro counting. So rather than losing muscle, you're hopefully just losing body fat, which was what happened for you. When you said that you got to 2 months out from your checkpoint, and that's where the challenge of actually sticking to it. Well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so as obviously the caloric amounts go down, and you just you are really driving down the carb intake, and so managing that with a busy day was definitely challenging. And I think I had a lot of cheat days, so to speak. And I think that's one thing, for whoever's going to listen to this podcast, is like, you don't have to be perfect, right? You don't need every week to be like an A+ or an A or even an A-, right? It's like, if you can put up a B-, B+ effort consistently, you will get to the end, right? And I think looking back, just the sticking to the diet was the hardest part. And I think it's okay to have like a bad day or a bad week. The key is just to bounce back and have like the next week be better. And so as long as the overall trend is that B or B- sort of grade, then you're fine, right?
Oh, when you had let's say you had a C- week, what were you doing to get yourself back to a B?
Yeah, and then that's where you guys are helpful. You have a coach that helps you kind of dig into it and figure out where kind of problem solve, see like how you can avoid that sort of mistake. And a lot of it's situational, contextual, right? Maybe it's there was some party, or maybe you didn't sufficiently like space out your food. Like one thing I often do is I like forget to eat sometimes. So then by the time like the evening comes, I'm just eating way too much, right? And so really forcing yourself to have small meals regularly was one big thing. And then just like the weekly progress, I'm a data guy, just like having that weekly progress tracker open and just like looking at it and saying, okay, the last 2 weeks were not good. I need to really like, make this one count. And that was helpful for me from a motivation standpoint.
Well, as a data guy who's looking at trends and stuff, did you notice certain things were triggering you to potentially have a worse week or a worse day? Like, what did you learn about yourself that causes you to eat off plan, make bad choices, that kind of thing? Like, what have you learned in that respect? Because I think that's such a key part of what comes after you get in shape.
Yeah, and to talk about learning, which in case we don't get to this later, like I was very humbled by the amount of education I received in this past year on nutrition, right? Just by doing this. So in medical school, we had 2 weeks of a nutrition block that was essentially like these chapters that we were to read online and take some online tests. So in my 4 years of medical school, and we can include like the training too, 3 years. So 7 years of becoming a doctor, I had 2 weeks of nutrition, right? And
it's insane, isn't it?
It's crazy, right? It's like, this makes no sense, right? And
when were you studying? Like, what years was this? These 4 years?
Yeah, this was like 2008. My med school was I did like a joint program, but this was back in 2008.
Okay.
And then, but I did other things in the middle. So I wasn't a doctor like this entire time, but yeah, it's wild. And it's still like that, right? Like 2 weeks out of the whole like 4 years of medical school were dedicated to nutrition. And I think that's finally starting to change. So I learned a ton about that. And then your question was about what I learned about myself. I think the other big thing, so I mentioned earlier, mental health is such a foundation for all of the stuff I see and so much of wellness and health, right? And it became very clear to me that all of us use food as like a dopamine boost. And so if we're having a bad day, or a tough day or something emotional, it's our crutch, right? And I think that's okay, right? Like it's okay to do that, right? It's not like nothing is all bad and nothing is all good. But I think the key is to be mindful and aware of it, right? Like if your goal is to, have 14% body fat, then you can't just, get that dopamine surge every day. Like once in a while, sure, that's fine if you want to use food for your dopamine. But that was coming back to your question. That was the key thing. Is like, oh wow, I do use food for that dopamine hit when I'm having a tough day or if I'm going through something emotional. And I always joke about how. Especially in residency. So for a lot of physicians training, we call it residency here. So it's the period after medical school. It's just like insanely hard. It doesn't make any sense, right? Like you're working like 80 to 100-hour weeks. Some of our shifts are 30 hours in a row.
Really?
And it just like none of this makes any sense, right?
I've written medically disadvantaged.
It doesn't. Yeah, I know. It doesn't make any sense, but that's a topic for a different discussion. But I could just see like the pattern of junk food when I think back to that era, right? Like I always joke, like I always know how my emotional being is done for a given week or month because I can just chart how many times I ordered Domino's pizza. And so it really is like all of us, right? Food is a crutch. And I think again, that can be okay sometimes, but if your goal is wellness, fitness, longevity, then you just have to be very aware of it and find other ways to get that dopamine hit, right? I think exercise, running can replace that. And I do that now, right? It's like, if I can get to the gym, I get that endorphin dopamine release. And so it's about replacing healthy habits with like the sort of easy habits of diet, right?
Yeah, that awareness factor is like, especially now, you can look back and laugh at the Domino's orders, but when you're in it, you probably have no idea. You're just racking up the points, and if you miss a day or two, Domino's are texting you saying, "Oh, we miss you. Everything okay?"
Well, they have it down to a science, right? Like clearly, they have algorithms where they know there's certain people that order a lot. They're like, hey, here's a coupon for 25% off, and now they've hooked you back in, right? It's dangerous.
Walk me through the DEXA results at your checkpoint versus the start. I remember seeing that. It was pretty cool. So maybe
so I the next thing is I have, so I've gotten 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 DEXAs.
Really?
And
well, you got 6 DEXAs done in the last 18 months. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So again, as I was saying, there's 2 types of scanners, and you can't compare GE and Hologic directly, but
okay.
3 of the scans were at the same company, so it's really nice, and they have it on one sheet, which I think I uploaded it. I can definitely send it to you. So this is cool. So before this journey started, so this is August 23. The result we previously talked about, 24.7% body fat at a weight of 174, right?
Yeah.
And then I came back to them in June of this year, right? And now my body fat drops to 11.9% at a weight of 140, right?
Yeah, wow.
And that was like, I remember I'm like, yes. Like my goal was 12%, right? So I was just like, so I was like, this is perfect, right? And I was very content with those results. And just to share the lean tissue, so started at 124 at checkpoint, it was 117. And then most recently, so November 25th, I went back to that same location because this was in San Francisco and I was in town. So I was like, oh, let me just get one real quick. And body fat there was 16%, total weight of 154, and then lean tissue of 122. So you can see like the lean tissue is starting to get back to where I started, but at a much healthier body fat percentage. And this is, there's more to go here. And
it'd be really interesting to see how the body recomposition continues to take place, because you could end up at a position where you are the same body weight as you were at the beginning, but your body composition is completely different, or probably a step below that. But that could be quite interesting if you get another year or 2 of consistency from you. Yeah,
exactly. And I think, I appreciated the fact that, I've gone through a number of your articles, and you guys have been evidence-based and data-driven, which is great. And I found a lot of the themes that you talk about, right? There's this homeostatic reset that happens, right? Like you have these like giant adipose tissue molecules, right? And in that first phase, the cut, which, it's challenging, but once you get to that like really lean phase, there's this like homeostatic reset, which is what I call it. And your body is processing food differently at that point, right? And that lends itself to being able to build a healthy amount of muscle and not regain the fat, right? If you stick to the program, right? Of course, you can't go back to Domino's every other day, right? But if you stick to the program, you will, build muscle mass in a healthy way. And in my case, I think it was, we'll round a little bit, but it was roughly half and half, right? I rebuilt 50% muscle, 50% fat. And that's pretty solid for someone that's like an intermediate, right? So I was pleased with those results. And obviously there's still more to be done here. And again, I love having this type of data. I think people were using the calipers and like the little electrical body impedance. They're just too variable and not nearly as like precise as this. This is like, you can't argue with a DEXA. Right? Like it's telling you like, and again, it's like, people are like, oh, maybe I drank too much water that day. No. Like it's on point.
Yeah, the leaner you get, the better you prime yourself for a good muscle building phase. So it's always good to like get lean first and then slowly build. And then you really just want to make sure you're not gaining too much body fat. And you also don't want to just gain weight for the sake of it. And this is me speaking quite broadly, but generally speaking, you want to push the strength up as much as possible. And only when you plateau at strength, genuine plateau at strength, then you might consider, all right, maybe we can add a little bit of a little bit of body weight to see if it helps the strength of the gym. But what you want to avoid is just chasing scale for the sake of it on the way up, because that will just slowly, that 50-50 ratio will probably end up 90-10, and then maybe it'll just be 100-0 in the favor of fat. So you just want to be careful of that. But that's that's the process, and that's why you want to be a bit more patient with the muscle mass building. But really, for you, your focus has got to be getting as strong as possible, because that's where the best gains will come for you. And that's where you can, like, if you get, let's say you're lifting, I don't know, 20 pounds on the bench press. That's not happening, but 20 pounds on the bench press.
Yeah.
If you get 20 pounds on the bench press to 40 pounds on the bench press in the next 18 months, that's going to make a massive difference in how your chest looks. Mm-hmm. So that's where you want to keep your focus in this sort of investment phase that we're in at the moment.
Yeah. And I to call out a couple other like key things that, that you talk a lot about, which wasn't obvious to me. Again, like I've been lifting since high school, right? Like there's a great article you talked about where like this sort of expectations around weight, right? Like I always thought, I'm like, oh, I got to be a $175, $180, $185, right?
You said it just like a guy does as well. Like exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, and it just isn't true, right? It really depends on your body composition, right? And like weight doesn't correlate to strength or even aesthetics, right? And I'm seeing that now, right? Like I'm 152 right now, and pushing just as much weight as before when I was like 175, right? And so you really have to not even think about like the exact weight, and just, again, I encourage everyone to get a DEXA, right? It's like, all right, just double down on what's your body fat percentage and what's your lean mass. And then, are you making progress in the gym? And this is where you guys are so helpful. It's like that structure, that regimen. And then the second point, it's not going to happen overnight, right? And you stress this a lot, right? Like it's a process. It's like a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Some RNTers, right? 4 years. So really embracing that and accepting that, right? I think there's so many like in 12 weeks get shredded, like advertisements, and it's sure, like in theory, like you could make some good progress in 12 weeks for some people. But if your body fat's like 26, 27%, like, no, you're not going to get there in 12 weeks, right? Yeah. At least not in a healthy way, right? And I appreciated you highlighting both, hey, this is going to take some time. Hey, like, don't anchor to just what your weight is. And so those were good pushes for me personally. And I think just a lot of guys don't realize this.
Most guys overestimate how much muscle mass they have, underestimate how much body fat they have. But they all think they're going to be shredded at 180, 170.
Exactly.
120, 130, 140. Right. So yeah, that's a big one to overcome. And on the concept of time, it's like, it also comes back to like getting in shape is relatively, I know we say it's challenging, but it's relatively straightforward. How long it takes will depend on the body fat. The hardest bit is actually maintaining the habits and keeping it long term. And that's what takes, anywhere from like 18 to 36 months for most people, if they've never been through that journey. And then muscle mass building, I mean, that's even longer. I always think like that. To get your ultimate physique, I'd say it's like 5 years of really consistent training is what I found to be like the good benchmark for people to get that their dream physique. Because you can't rush muscle mass. It's not like fat loss where it's very linear. Muscle mass is like some you can go through months of like nothing, and then you might get a little bit of a spike, and then it's nothing. It's quite boring as well. So that's why you just got to fall in love with the gym, because that's the only thing that can keep you excited and motivated.
Yeah, and I totally believe that now. I think we're just such a culture of immediate results, right? And people think things will happen overnight. And so again, I think I appreciate you reminding us, hey, like this is like a year's process, right? It's not overnight. And again, you have to have the consistency, right? Yeah. Like we all know so many gym goers who are so, willy-nilly, like, they hit the gym aggressively in January and February, and then it teeters off, right? Yeah. And so if you truly want your end goal to be, you know, being fit, having, you know, good muscle mass, like you really do have to be consistent. And that's just good, like advice for life, right? Whether it's your career, it's like, you just have to have good consistency, you know?
Have you done any bloods during this process for yourself?
I done what?
Any blood tests? Like
Oh yeah. So
yeah,
you know, it's great when you're your own doctor, right? So and that I actually took some notes because this was one of the things I want to talk about. So
go for it.
I did a number of blood tests along the way, just because I was curious, and then there's a couple of things I checked. So I checked my blood counts, so just red blood cells, white blood cells. That was like totally fine. I checked my electrolytes, and that was, you know, totally fine. And then something I think a lot about is vitamin D. South Asians tend to be deficient in vitamin D, so I was keeping an eye on that. And I personally do supplement. The data on vitamin D is a little bit mixed, but personally, I think it makes sense, and there's really no downside to taking a vitamin D supplement.
How much you take?
I do either 1,000 or 2,000 IUs per day. Yeah. And vitamin D is one of these like basic cofactor molecules that's part of like so many different biochemical pathways that for me it's a no-brainer, right? Yeah. It can't hurt, it can only help, right? And then the other big one is cholesterol. So this is really interesting.
Go on.
And this is a good advertisement for RNT. Okay, so I've been tracking my cholesterol for the last like 20 years, right? And most people don't do this. I'm just, again, a data guy, right? And it's really interesting, right? So like in my 30s, there was a clear inflection point, and I would say like throughout my 30s, my cholesterol was like hanging out in the 230s basically, and my LDL was ranging anywhere from 130s to 170s. And so just to review, you want your cholesterol, your total cholesterol to be less than 200, and you want your LDL to be less than 100. And it's well established that South Asians have cholesterol issues, right? And I'd been trying so many different things, right? Like, oh, I want to get this down. I want to get this down. And I finally kind of gave up and said, all right, this is just my genetics, right? Mm. And so I actually started taking a cholesterol medication, coming back to that point about you want to stop preventing that plaque buildup and try to reverse it, right? And I was sold on the value of a medication like Lipitor, or also known as atorvastatin. And of course, I saw a big decline. So my numbers after starting a cholesterol medication, my total cholesterol went down to like 150. And then my LDL was now less than 100. It was like hovering in the 70s, I think, or 80s. Oh, wow. Yeah. And when I started RNT, I was like, let me do a test. Let me like go off the cholesterol medication, which means the cholesterol probably went back to its previous numbers, right? And then I checked in April, and this is wild. So I wasn't even at the checkpoint, right? April was like almost maybe at checkpoint, but not quite. And my cholesterol, and this is totally off cholesterol meds. So my total cholesterol was 143, which was lower than it had been when I was on a medication. Yeah. And then my LDL was like 82, which was roughly similar to when I was on the medication, right? And I was blown away. I was like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. This just proved that it's bad genes, right? What it probably is the visceral fat or adiposity in general, right? And I'm sure, you know, you could probably go down the rabbit hole on this, but clearly having lower body fat helps your cholesterol, right? And even the other number that we pay attention to is triglycerides, which again, South Asians tend to have higher triglycerides. Even that number came down. So wow. Coming back to the longevity thing, right? Like, sure, like, you know, we're doing this for feeling better, more muscle mass, aesthetics, but also cholesterol and longevity, right? And I was I thought that was like a really interesting and fascinating result. And so I don't know if other RNTers are actively checking their cholesterol, but I would suspect they'll see a similar change.
That's impressive.
Yeah. And I think, one key thing about just like medicine is like, there's so many things that we don't know to measure, right? Like we're still in the dark about many things. And so it's cool to realize these things, and there's probably a ton of other benefits from having lower body fat, right? And we just don't know what to measure or what to look for, but it's clearly having an impact. And so again, coming back to longevity, lots of research science being done. I think it's pretty simple, right? It's like diet, exercise, and sleep, right? And when you're talking about diet and exercise, get a DEXA and make sure your body fat is reasonable, right? So
interesting. Well, did you get any hormone checks or hormone panels? Did you check your testosterone?
I did. I was actually, I did. My testosterone was fine. I think it went up, of course. So exactly as you would predict, like, because your testosterone gets converted into estrogen by adipose tissue. So if you have less adipose tissue, then it should go up. But also,
it's just a good example of getting leaner and seeing the benefits, right?
Yeah, and then also muscle mass. Like as you're building more muscle, that's going to induce testosterone production, right? So especially as a male, as you're getting older, like these are the building blocks, right? You have to do weightlifting because muscle loss is a major issue as you get older. It's something I think about for my dad. There's a formal term for it in medicine called sarcopenia. It's a huge issue. And as you know, there's a lot of focus on Ozempic right now for weight loss. And, this is a little bit tangential, but I think what's cool here is we're doing all of this without medication, right? I always have some pause about using Ozempic for weight loss. It really depends on the person, but we don't have long-term data on some of these medications yet. And if there is a natural way to do it, and granted, like you have to have certain resources to do a program like this, like time mainly, right? Not everyone has the luxury of time. And so if you can do that, this is like the way to do it, right? And we're seeing results that are just as good, if not better than Ozempic, right? And again, it's the health benefits of this for me are so crystal clear. And it's borne out in the data as seen in the cholesterol trend, right?
Amazing. The Ozempic in what you do as a physician, you're seeing it being administered more and more with patients. And do you have reign as a physician to be able to administer it quite freely?
So the scenario I see Ozempic used in is people with diabetes. And I think that's a no-brainer. Like if someone has diabetes, it works great. Also, some of our cardiac patients are on it. Again, the data there is really good. I don't do any of the weight loss stuff, but it's now being used. It is now approved in the US. It's approved for weight loss indications. And I would say for certain patients, like the morbidly obese, it makes a lot of sense. I worry when, like if I had turned to Ozempic, that would worry me, right? It's like I don't need it. Like, do the benefits outweigh the risks of some of the unknown side effects, right? And there are other side effects too, right? It causes GI issues. It can cause thyroid nodules. So it always has to be a careful benefit risk calculation. And for my patients, again, it's for diabetes. And so that is a total benefits greater than side effects situation. But for some of these weight loss scenarios, I worry. And it's become, a lot of places are using it. And, I think TBD on what is the best way to do this, but it always gives me pause about whether some of these providers out there that do weight loss clinics are being thoughtful enough about who and when they use it, right? What's interesting is you still have to do certain things too, right? It's not like a magic pill, right? Sure, yeah, it helps a lot, but you still have to think about your diet. And actually, like now they're saying a lot of these patients that are on Ozempic, they're not going to the gym, right? It's the mechanism is it basically reduces hunger. And because they're not going to the gym, they're actually losing a ton of muscle mass. So they're becoming sarcopenic, which is not a good thing, right? And so again, it's like we're using it as a shortcut without paying attention to like some of the side effects. And again, you need a program. You need a full program to make sure you're not losing muscle mass and et cetera. Sorry, we're getting into the medical realm a bit here, but I like anytime you can do something naturally, like without medications, like obviously.
So you will be on with your cholesterol meds then?
I am, in? But I'm off of them, but I'll probably go on to them because so you can hear my pitch. So in general, getting your LDL as low as possible is better, so that you're really slowing down. And so for me, I'm going to recheck it first and foremost. So I need to see where my LDL is at. But I am a believer in driving the LDL as low as possible. And so instead of doing, I think I was doing a medication called rosuvastatin. It was 10 milligrams. So instead of 10 milligrams, I'll probably just do 5, right? So I'm going to still be on it, but I'll just reduce the amount. So, again, and that's the only medication I take. So, so I'm okay with that. And I do buy the science about plaque buildup. Again, we were talking about vascular dementia, right? These like tiny little vessels that have plaque built up, and there's no solution there once it happens, right? And unfortunately, I deal with a lot of patients who have cognitive dementia or vascular dementia, and it's tough. It's really tough. And again, it's not so much about extending those years, but like making those last years like really quality years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sohan, how's the physical being a vehicle for you?
The physical being a vehicle for me, the way I interpret that is it provides, it's a vehicle for discipline, right? We were talking about this earlier. I think doing a program like this, getting to the gym 4 times a week, doing the cardio, the discipline, right, that it builds is so valuable for other things, right? And that's how I interpret that mantra. And again, like you're not going to see those changes until you're disciplined, and then it applies to everything else, right? Like career goals, even like family goals, etc., right? And you just have to be consistent.
Amazing. How's it impacted your career and family?
So for career stuff, I think having, this element that is a constant, that are like, regardless of the day, how it goes, you have a constant structure is always helpful, because my days, every day is like very different depending on, so one of the things, I'm a doctor, but my big passion is using technology to improve healthcare. So, I always joke, we use fax machines still. That's where we're stuck, right? Like we're literally still using fax machines in 2024.
You actually are using fax machines?
Hospitals still use fax machines. No, it's embarrassing, right? It's wild. Yeah. So like I had to fax something to a local, health department just recently, and I handed it to the secretary, and I'm like, can you fax this over to them? It was just like wild, right? Anyway, so a big part of what I do is trying to think about technology, especially right now. It's exciting with AI. And so I spend about half my days like actually in the hospital, and then the other half is pushing forth ideas. And so those tend to be unstructured days, and it's helpful to have, something like RNT providing a little bit of structure that helps, it's a bit of a flywheel, right? It makes you have structure for other parts of your day. And I know there's a lot of RNTers that are entrepreneurs, and I'm sure they say the same thing. Like because being an entrepreneur is so unstructured, right? Like
Yeah.
I think most people thrive when you have you like show up to office, you're expected to be there at a certain time, and then you leave at a certain time. But for entrepreneurs, every day is different, and being able to anchor to one thing can just stabilize the day, which is great. That was the career stuff, right? And then family stuff. I think the same thing. Just every family is different, and it can help you just when you have the fitness part figured out. I think it's again one of those things where like there's sort of a bi-directional arrow between wellness, fitness, and like mental health, and so they're both feeding off each other. And so when your fitness and wellness are optimized, your mental health's optimized. And so everyone has like family stuff, and so just dealing with family stuff, you're going to come in with a more level head, calm presence. And we haven't even talked about mindfulness, but all of this stuff plays into mindfulness too. And clearly I drink the RNT Kool-Aid, right?
Yeah, amazing. How has it helped your mindfulness then? You mentioned mindfulness. And I also remember, I think it was around your shoot time. I think I really liked, I think you gave like a very spiritual answer to the whole shoot journey experience.
Yeah, I think mind, body, soul maybe is what I said. I think about that framework a lot. So, there's the body stuff, which this stuff really helps. The stuff meaning RNT helped optimize, right? And then I was talking about the bidirectional arrows between mind and body, right? So as you optimize your wellness, health, fitness, it definitely helps with your mental health, right? Just even like walking, right? Like walking out in nature, which the 10,000 steps requirement made me do. That alone has huge advantages for your mental health, right? And there's actually this great British Medical Journal article which compared various interventions for depression, and something as simple as getting outside and walking around was like as good as an antidepressant, right? So I always point to that. It's like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and I'm not saying this only applies to people with depression, but like just in general, for all of us, like for mood, there are a lot of simple things. So that again, that bidirectional arrow between body and mind, right? And then the soul part, that's like a bit of a personal, family religious thing, right? You got to do the exploration of that on your own. But the first two, if you can get that right, it gives you time to do the third piece. And so it's been I've been thankful for the last few years to having the space to strengthen the mind, strengthen the body. So coming back to using the body as a vehicle, right? When you can get one of those strong, it's easier to like flex to work on the other two, right? If all three are in shambles, it's like just too much, right? So the vehicle as a body, right? It's like, okay, let's get one of those down, and then you can flex to work on the other two, right? And so that's one way to think about it.
And you said that if you got the mind and the body down, you sort of create a bit more space for the soul. Have you found that to be the case this year for you? Like you had been able to do a bit more exploration there?
Yeah, I think part of my journey is like the work I do. I spend a fair amount of time with end of life situations, and so that's always a very profound spiritual process in its own right, and I help others navigate that. And so as I think about that, and also as you get older, you've had enough life experiences, and you can put that together and start creating beliefs and ideas and themes for yourself. And I was also very like, my family is Hindu, and as a kid, you just accept certain things. And as a younger adult, I definitely rejected certain things. And so there's this like dance with religion that happens, and you've learn to figure out, okay, what are things here that you agree with, and what are things that you may not agree with, and so just that personal journey, adjacent to being a physician. Yeah, it's been, again, like you can't have all three sort of just up in the air, right? Like you need one to be sort of anchored, and then it allows you to do the work on the other two.
For sure. What almost kept you from joining a year ago?
I was in a good place, and honestly, maybe to think about it another way is to say, why didn't I join earlier, right? Part of it is I just didn't know about like the RNT, so it was like just serendipity, right? But also like timing and space, right? Like during training, there was no way that was going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. So I think I'm thankful for having the resources and time to say, hey, like I have the time to do this right now, and a lot of people don't, right? Like if you're holding down like 2 jobs and you have 3 kids and you're like a single mom, like forget it, like this is going to be tough, right? But I think just the timing worked out, and part of it's also like as a person, like what are you going to prioritize for that year, for that moment, and it worked out.
Amazing. And what are the goals for 2025?
Yeah, I'm just starting to think about that. I think, earlier in the conversation, we were talking about continuing that like regimented, methodical muscle building, right? And I want to continue that. And of course, continue anchoring to data and, getting DEXAs every few months to make sure like I'm on track. And so I think that's one goal. And then second, I'm in a new city. So like that's the big thing. It's like, I think it's easy to say, hey, let's continue this journey. But I think there's some very unique sort of challenges being in New York, right? Like everyone wants to go out. You could easily drink every night, and a lot of shiny things to do and see and to eat here. And so can I maintain that discipline through the chaos of New York City will be one key challenge.
That sounds like a goal. That sounds like a goal in and of itself.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so far it's working, right? It's like I do feel more disciplined than say 5-10 years ago, and I think it's you can go out a little bit, you just can't go out every night and eat like a maniac, right? So the balance, right, is key. So those are the high level goals for next year.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story, Sohan. It's been an interesting chat with lots of different directions. So I've enjoyed it, and I'm excited to see what you do next.
Yeah, thanks, Akash.